Hello, Steve White, Trek Boy 89 for Steve Arts 89, Star Trek's alleged gatekeeper. Now, when I was watching Strange New Worlds, Ghosts of Valyria the other night, and they were exploring number one's background, I kind of didn't really like it because I liked her being mysterious, and the idea that they were going to actually flesh her out and all that, but I didn't mind it, but I wasn't sure how it fit. Like how did she go all the way through Starfleet without people knowing she was an alien essentially, and all these sort of questions came up, and then lying to Starfleet, and how was that going to be maintained, and what would that lead to, and just a whole bunch of issues. But what I didn't realise was they didn't create all of this. Basically, Dorothy Fontana wrote a book in 1989, which explored the backstory of number one. I didn't realise this. I actually think I owned the book. It was called Vulcan's Glory, but I never read it. I had a whole bookshelf full of Star Trek books. I had most of them, and I ended up selling them years ago because I needed the space. I have digital copies of the books, electronic e-publishing books or whatever they're called. So I'll read it one day, but I didn't realise, because I know I know everything there is about like the TV series and the movies, but I haven't read all the books. I didn't all the non-canon sort of stuff I hadn't read. So I didn't realise this when I was watching it, but apparently they used the backstory for number one from Vulcan's Glory. And on one level, I'm kind of happy they did that. I'm like, because that's the canon a lot of people would have for her, the head canon that they read, that the unofficial canon sort of thing. So the idea they use that instead of making up their own version, which is what they'd normally do. And they'd normally do that, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, to save money on paying people the rights to use their characters, because they care less about the fans who are attached to these stories, actually having them canonized and paying the people who created them, when they can just create their own stories and then get all the rights and money and everything for that for themselves. So they did it, but they didn't acknowledge Dorothy Fontana. So they had their cake and they ate it too. They used this great story that was written by Dorothy Fontana. They used this backstory that was established, that people actually would have been familiar with and wanted to see on the show, and they didn't have to pay anyone anything. Now, you might argue that because it's a novel written for Star Trek, they own it, that the person who wrote it doesn't own it, they're just writing for them, writer for hire, whatever it is. But to not acknowledge someone, and it's not just some anonymous random person who wrote one novel, it's Dorothy freaking Fontana. If you know who Dorothy Fontana is, she was the story editor? I can't even read my own notes as usual. Yeah, story editor. She was the story editor on the original Star Trek. She was the youngest woman to be doing that in Hollywood. She wrote under pseudonyms and stuff like that to get stuff done. So she was DC Fontana at the time. And she was great. She wrote Charlie X, Tomorrow's Yesterday, Journey to Babel, Ultimate Computer, Enterprise Incident, but that was apparently really drastically rewritten. She wrote Yesteryear for the animated series, which is, some people consider that to be the only canon episode, and I'm like, if the whole series is canon or it's not, that's just stupid, but okay, whatever. And she also wrote Dax for Deep Space Nine as well, and she co-wrote the Encounter at Farpoint for Next Generation. So she wrote for the original series, the animated series, Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine. And they didn't credit her. I think that is kind of disgraceful and a real missed opportunity, because they could have said, this female writer who had to pretend to be a man and write under DC Fontana back in the day, and how brilliant she was. We are acknowledging her and using her backstory. They could have made a big deal out of it, like they do with everything, and used her name. But I guess they wanted to save the money. Now, she died a while ago, so they didn't have to pay her any money, but her estate would be owed some money. In my opinion, as far as I know, allegedly, supposedly, I don't know anything. I'm just speculating here. And yeah, Robert Meyer Burnett did a show and he was talking about it. He has been sick, and what brought him out of his bed to talk was this, because it annoyed him so much that they didn't give her credit. And it wasn't just they didn't credit her in the actual episode credits. The showrunner, Henry Alonso Jr., did an interview talking about giving Una a backstory and saying, well, we had to bring something new, we had to debate, do we add something to this character and all this stuff. And at no point did he acknowledge that someone else wrote it. He was acting the whole time like he wrote it. It was his story. And and yes, he wrote the episode and so forth, but yeah, so maybe he thinks that it just seems really disrespectful, and but mostly probably comes down to money, because maybe, you know, he wanted to give her a credit just to acknowledge her and everything, but then they'd have to pay her, and the studio was like, we're not paying anything, it's not in the budget, you can't do it. So maybe he wasn't even allowed to talk about it. I don't know. But seems like an odd thing, and I don't like it. So I wanted to talk about that because it annoyed me. And there are other instances apparently where this happened. David Mack supposedly wrote a novel called Control, which had an evil AI just like what they had in season 2 of Discovery. So apparently they lifted that. And Harlan Ellison, this must have been Paramount's revenge on Harlan Ellison, because he went nuts because he wrote an episode of Star Trek in the original series, and they totally rewrote it. Gene Roddenberry totally rewrote it. And the episode on air is basically Gene's episode that came from Harlan's idea. And he spent years fighting and arguing, and anyone who tried to use it or tried to act like it wasn't his story, he just was just obsessed with litigating and, being given the proper respect and credit and everything, and money or whatever for that. They went back, and when they created The Guardian of Forever in Discovery, or wrote The Guardian of Forever for Discovery, they used his original version that was rewritten, and that was supposed to be their way of sort of thumbing their nose up at Gene Roddenberry, who rewrote Ellison by going back to his original idea of the Guardian of Forever being a man that sort of walks around and stuff like that. But to use his story, I don't believe they paid this. I'm hearing, I don't know if this is true or not, but they didn't acknowledge him properly or pay his estate. He would have gone nuts over that. So maybe this was their way of getting back to him, getting back at him after all the stress he put them through over the rights and all that, and was to put it in Discovery, and after he was gone he couldn't do or say anything about it. Now I'll have to check whether they actually credited him and whether he got paid. I don't know, but I hear that they didn't. I didn't realise that at the time. I just assumed they did because of all the drama. I assume his family, his estate would continue fighting just as much as he did over preserving his rights and recognition and that, but I have no idea what happened there. I thought that was interesting, and I do think it's just bad form, I think, just to take someone's idea, even if you own it, and use it and not acknowledge them. Even if they didn't, I don't know how it works exactly for novels. I know it was described with TV writers and TV credits, it's very different, but novelizations of comics, apparently it's different. So, but it's legal matters aside, financial matters aside, there's the right thing and the wrong thing, and to take somebody's idea and not acknowledge it is wrong in my personal opinion, my humble opinion. But at the same time, I'm glad they did it, because now they've canonized this story that she wrote, and maybe they did it subversely. Maybe they wanted to do that and the new Paramount wouldn't, so they just did it on the sly. I don't know, but it's happened, and I wish they'd do it more. I wish, instead of just writing new stories, which they usually don't do as good a job of, they would just use some of the established stories and established backgrounds and things for the characters and stuff in the shows, because fans are already attached to it. And even if they're not, just imagine you love Una and you see this episode, then you find out there's a whole novel about it that goes into, it's just more to love. Why not? I don't get it. So yeah, I just was shocked to hear that. I didn't realise, like I said, I was a bit embarrassed. I'm like, God, I can't believe I didn't know this novel was written by DC Fontana. I'd noticed her name on the cover, and I meant to read it, but I didn't sort of realise it went into no one's backstory or everything, because some of the novels I didn't really like a lot. I felt they were kind of not as good as the Star Trek episodes, and a lot of these novels are written after Star Trek ended and people were very hungry for Star Trek, but because I grew up in an era where, I had Star Trek repeats in the beginning, and then I had the movies on TV, and I had Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, which I got very late. I missed most of them on TV. I watched most of them on video. And then Deep Space Nine and Voyager I watched mostly on video, because the TV was so far behind, the videos would come out first. And then the only show I watched live on TV every week was Enterprise, and even then we got season 1, 2, 3 and 4 before the fourth season had finished on TV, because they were behind. So I watched the last 3 episodes, I think, of Enterprise on TV after I'd watched them on DVD. So I wasn't starving for them, so I didn't really need to read the novels to get a fix of Star Trek. I only read a few of them. But the idea of just ignoring this whole vast sort of, universe of stories and that, why they don't just utilize them. Because if they can do that without legally paying the authors, which they apparently have done with DC Fontana, unless they did it and they just, people were talking about just didn't know about it, I don't know. Why wouldn't they do it more often? It just makes sense to use what's already established, because the whole point of using Star Trek for its name recognition, brand recognition, is that it's already got a inbuilt audience, and the novels and all that have an audience as well. So why wouldn't they just? I don't know. I'm gonna go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. I'm sort of happy they did it, but also I wish they'd done it differently. But if this means not paying, means they can use more histories from the books and stuff like that, I think it would be better for the series, not necessarily for the writers. But we'll see. I'm gonna go. Bye.